Welcome, viewers. We're here today to talk about 50 years ago this month in the Billboard Hot 100 chart. And this month it's January 1970. So the 60s are over, but we have some bleed over from the 60s, of course, into this chart. And we'll be talking about that. Kind of to give it all a historical perspective, I'd like to talk about a few of the things, other things that were going on in the wider world. For one thing, on January 1st, Richard Nixon signed the first major environmental law into effect, the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. One of the things I think that is often forgotten when we talk about Richard Nixon is that he was a great initiator in terms of doing stuff for the environment. And of course, there was a big environmental movement coming out of the 60s, starting with the publication of Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. But it's now having effect, and Richard Nixon is even putting his signature underneath it. So
Nixon is again a compelling figure, an interesting figure, a figure that was ultimately, of course, undone by his own paranoia, his own demons. But Nixon understood the political game. He understood that both left and right needed wins. He was very much a centrist in that regard, and so the signing of this bill, I think, is critically important. Of course, Nixon is, it's still Vietnam. The war rages. In '69 alone, there were 12,000 Americans killed in Vietnam. It's a dreadful time. Nixon and Kissinger begin to move the war to neighboring countries. They begin a sustained bombing campaign, which Americans actually would react to later this year, particularly students. Nixon's a compelling figure, a complicated figure, and clearly a divisive figure, even in this time, well before Watergate. Dave, I have a quick question for you, though. If it's January 1970, what's the population of the United States? I'll just give you a hint here that the population of the United States today is roughly about 330 million. So what would it have been in 1970?
Yeah, I'm going to take a stab at, say, 180 million.
Yeah, it's close. Yeah, it's roughly about 200 million. Yeah, that's really good. That's a really good guess. So the United States is roughly a third smaller than it is today. And I think that matters because when we're talking about popular culture, and we're talking about just almost everything regarding the United States, it's a much more intimate country. And so there is obviously, the United States today is a very diverse, very kind of siloed country, and it's quite large. But America was more intimate in 1970. And so I think that's a key here. And as we go through and talk a little bit more about the music here, this is music that it's a wide variety on the charts. We'll see in January 1970, it's just a whole host of people. For example, in the top 10, it's sort of mind-blowing, the range. But most people in the United States who listen to radio, for example, are hearing really all of these songs. And so it's a chance for Americans to take in a wide variety of content from a variety of genres. So maybe we should get started. Think about the charts for mid-January 1970.
Oh, baby, not yet.
No,
we got all sorts of things going on in the 70s.
Oh my goodness,
So just lay back. And,
all right.
January 3rd, the Beatles made their last recording as a group in Abbey Road Studios. That was Harrison's "I Me Mine" for the Let It Be album, and and John Lennon wasn't even there for that one. So, but that was the last actual recording session that they had.
Okay, so had this been made public, their split at this point? What's your sense of that?
I don't think so. I think McCartney came out little bit later, just maybe a few weeks later in 1970.
Okay, so it was still private. I mean, the Discord was still largely private, and the people around the world, people in the United States, didn't really have any sense that the Beatles were really coming undone, or maybe were completely undone at this point.
Yeah, I think there had been some intimation of that. I mean, you had the what it was originally going to be called the Get Back Sessions. The movie. Was that the Let It? The concerts, rooftop concert. My God, who's spacing?
Yeah, the Let It Be sessions and the concert.
Let It Be. All right.
At top of the Apple building.
And that movie, the Let It Be movie, I think gave people some clue that things were not all rosy.
Well, absolutely. As the albums did themselves, right? I mean,
right. So there was that. A day later, Keith Moon ran over and killed his bodyguard.
Who's Keith Moon?
Who's Keith Moon? Well,
Keith Moon.
There was a rock group called The Who, and Keith Moon was their drummer.
Was their drummer, yeah. Keith Moon passed away late 70s, right?
At the late, I think 79.
Yeah, Moon was right, but Moon was notorious, legendary for his excess.
Yes, and the incident was, of course, he was intoxicated. Nothing unusual for him, and he and his entourage were fleeing a group of fans that were just too many and overexcited, and his bodyguard had gotten out of the car to try to push people back, and I guess Moon panicked and hit the gas, and that was all she wrote.
That's a terrible deal, and Moon himself felt quite terrible about it. It kind of haunted him for the rest of his life. But again, this was a day in the life of Keith Moon. He lived, he was completely out of control. And I think by the time we get to this era, his drumming had faded as well. I mean, I don't think he was nearly at the height of his powers. Yet he was still a young guy. He probably was still in his 20s at this point.
Yeah, that's right.
But he was on the decline.
Okay, January 1st, the first episode of All My Children airs. I don't know if you're familiar with soap operas very much, but All My Children was immensely successful. Had a 30-year run, and the main character was a liberal peacenik a peace activist.
There we go. Yeah.
Someone from a rich conservative family. So you've got some plot points.
The generation gap.
Yeah.
Okay.
January 11th, Kansas City Chiefs upset the Minnesota Vikings 23-7 in Super Bowl IV.
Yeah, which would be the last
Super Bowl that they were going to win until
2020, I'm pretty sure.
2020.
Yeah, that was also the last game of the AFL NFL, and after that game, then the two leagues became one. They merged. And Kansas City was a big underdog in that game. But Len Dawson.
Jumbo Jet had a passenger flight. It was not yet a commercial flight. It was just invited guests from New York. 747, the Boeing 747. With Pan Am.
Yeah, real quickly, when I was a kid, a jumbo jet, a 747, landed in a town pretty close to where I grew up. Again, it was empty, but they opened it up to the public. That is, you could circle the plane, you could walk around the plane, and just the scale of it was just unimaginable, right? I mean, the original manifestation of the 747 had a balcony or another level that you could walk up, and then there was like a little bar and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There were 361 passengers on that, and Pat Nixon then later actually did the champagne bottle christening for the Young American, which was the name of first commercial jumbo jet.
Yeah, Pat Nixon, boy, the Pat Nixon, she's something. But the notion, right, that there's always this olive branch extended to youth, right? That first place, it's the young America. The United States is being kind of reborn, and youth playing this role. It's always a part of the conversation of this era.
January 15th, the Bob Hope Christmas special breaks all previous viewing records, all rated for an entertainment show.
Oh, good God! All right, so do you have the list of some of Hope's co-stars?
No, I don't. That would be interesting.
That would be interesting. It's always like
Nancy Sinatra,
maybe Charo.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Always some college football team. I don't know. Bob Hope. Hope was still a big player culturally in 1970. He was, like you're suggesting here, broke records here on TV. His trips to Vietnam to visit the soldiers were still. He was also a kind of divisive cultural figure in that he was pretty adamant in his attacks on the anti-war movement and on youth culture in general. But he was still a kind of potent force in entertainment.
The Beach Boys might have been on that.
They probably were.
They appeared on some Bob Hope thing.
Yeah, Hope always had this kind of, a kind of middle of the road kind of popular act to kind of bring in the kids. But yeah, oh geez, do you remember those shows were horrendous?
Oh man, yeah.
Oh man.
January 25th, the movie MASH premieres.
Yeah, Robert Altman. That's a dark movie. And again, it's the mobile surgical unit in Korea, but we all know what it was about. But yeah.
28th, Arthur Ashe was prohibited from playing in the South African Open.
Yeah, Arthur Ashe, right? American tennis player, won Wimbledon. Arthur Ashe was in the military, and also was in the military while he was was playing tennis. He was a kind of civil rights pioneer in this sport. He was the leading black male tennis player for many years, and he encountered all sorts of problems. And the South African thing is obviously, one of many things he dealt with.
January 29th, Paul Ryan and Heather Graham were born. One of them went on to become a national treasure. January 30th.
Wait a minute. All right, Heather Graham.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
The world shrugs. Heather Graham.
Well, the world doesn't shrug. Maybe you shrug, but Heather Graham, she's an actress, a talented actress, and a very attractive.
Well, Heather, if you're watching, my apologies. And Paul Ryan again is an American politician. Is that Paul Ryan?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, maybe no longer, but he was.
Well, yeah, he was the Speaker of the House for a time in the United States. Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, and last but not least, January 30th, China successfully tested its first intercontinental missile with a payload of 1 megaton.
Yeah, China was still a deeply impoverished country in 1970, deeply impoverished, and still a kind of hermit kingdom. And so that must have come as an enormous shock to many people around the world, because one of China's struggles in 1970, really throughout the 70s, was just feeding its population. And for them to get into
like North Korea today.
Yeah, I think so. Scale is different, but right, just
right.
And really mysterious too. China, much like North Korea today, there was a lot of not knowing about China in the early 1970s. And to his credit, Nixon helps to break down those barriers and makes
absolutely
the whole ping pong diplomacy thing and all.
The first American president to make overtures toward Red China.
And so Well, apparently, and it's now February 1970. No, it's still January 1970.
No, so I'm giving you the official green light to go with the chart now.
No, that's good. No, it's just the 60s were, just, it must have just been in a kind of breath of fresh air. I think the 60s probably wore everyone out. By the time you got to January 1970, I think people were ready. I don't know what people expected exactly, but the 60s were so enormously draining on some level that this had to be an interesting and important moment. I think everybody probably noticed it. So yeah, so to the charts, let's do it. And so at number one in January of 1970 is one of the themes to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, B.J. Thomas. A Bacharach and David tune, Hal David wrote the lyrics. It is one of the, I think it's one of the slightest of the Bacharach Davis songs. It's probably, in fact, it would be my contention, that's probably the slightest and most inconsequential of their songs that was the most popular.
Well, it's very listenable, and it's easy listening. I think it epitomizes what easy listening is.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I just and it was. I mean, I think for B.J. Thomas, probably the most important song of his career. But so at number one is Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. At number two is the Dutch group Shocking Blue and Venus. Shocking Blue it's a great song. Yeah,
yeah.
Propulsive guitar, kind of peculiar, misspoken lyrics. Shocking Blue came out of the Netherlands. They were part of, it was called kind of the Dutch invasion. There were a couple of other groups at that time that were scratching the charts around the world. This really would be their only hit. It was covered in the 80s, in the mid 80s, by Bananarama, and Bananarama took that song to number one. Yeah. This version of Venus, however, did peak at number one. I mean, it makes allusions, of course, to the goddess Venus, the goddess of fertility, the goddess of love, Roman goddess, and so it's a kind of potent kind of image, but it's kind of a cool song. I've always thought there's something about it that I thought was just really, really super cool. And so Shocking Blue at number two. Number three is the group from Gary, Indiana, that Jackson family, Jackson 5 and I Want You Back at number three.
Right, and we'll talk a little bit more about this next month when it peaks at number two. But yeah, the Jacksons were at the height of their success. They were just everywhere, and rightly so. They were just an incredibly appealing group with some songs that just were very poppy and very, very easy to listen to.
Yeah, they're at the sort of the zenith of their fame, and we'll talk a bit more about them soon. But at number four is Diana Ross and Supremes, and Someday We'll Be Together, which I believe is the last song that charts with Diana Ross. I think that may be the last song that charts with Diana Ross in the Supremes. Girl groups were so important in the 1960s, the late 50s into the 60s, just a whole host of them. Probably, though, the most important, or at least the most popular, were the Supremes. And the Supremes were this cauldron of discord, right? That people who read the tea leaves when it comes to Supremes know about the comings and the goings. They had multiple lineup changes. I should add real quickly that this particular incarnation of the Supremes featured Ross, Mary Wilson, and Cindy Birdsong. But there were multiple versions of the Supremes. Diana Ross was always, though, the dominant figure, which caused its own, its own.
Well, she wasn't even the most talented singer in the group. The reason that she was up there was because she was quite photogenic. She looked good on television.
Yeah, and to that, she was, I think, by most accounts, yeah, the most photogenic. And so this is the 45 sleeve. Diana Ross would leave the group and then go on to success as a solo artist, and she became a kind of, I think people would label her a kind of diva. And she's still, you know, I'm not a huge Diana Ross fan. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other, but there are a number of Supreme songs that are really quite powerful. And I think this is amongst their best. There is something about this song that is, that I think is meaningful, but you just can't get away from the fact when we talk about the Supremes that it's just this massive upset. You know, it was captured quite interestingly in the play, and then later the musical, and later the film Dreamgirls. Yeah, at number 4, Someday We'll Be Together. At number 5 is, well, arguably this is one of the most important bands of all time, but a band that rarely made its way to the pop charts, and it's Led Zeppelin. It's Led Zeppelin's A Whole Lot of Love.
Yeah, there's a reason that they rarely made it into the pop charts, and one of the reasons was that they didn't release singles. This was the few exceptions to that. I think this is the only single that they ever actually released, and this wasn't even released in England as a single. Jimmy Page pretty much conceived the whole concept of Led Zeppelin was that this is an album band. Jimmy Page and to a lesser extent John Paul Jones had paid their dues as session musicians in the early 60s.
Yeah,
played hundreds of
that's right,
sessions for people like Burt Bacharach, The Who, Donovan, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, you name it, they're on it. Yeah, that's for sure.
And they were just tired of that type of capsulated little 3-minute product that they were producing again and again. And so Jimmy Page put together the New Yardbirds, which became Led Zeppelin. This is what he wanted to do. And he saw the development that was going on in the late 60s of the rise of FM radio.
That's right. That's exactly right.
A lot of things were contributing to that. In the late 60s, Japan began exporting inexpensive stereo components. So you started to have car radios with AM, FM in every car. FM radio had been around since the 1930s, but it had just never taken off. And now it was coming into its own.
Right.
Stereo sales were going through the roof, and every stereo had its integrated solid state stereo receiver with AM, FM. FM stations were arising to meet the demand, and especially like in college communities and so on. And the thing about FM is that they were not allowed to just reproduce what AM was already doing. They were supposed to come up with different content. So they essentially discovered album-oriented rock. AOR is the format for FM classically. And they started to look for and need album cuts that were not merely made for the 2 or 3 minute pop hits. And a lot of albums that had been produced up until that time were put together from a couple of single hits that had been made, and then kind of glued together with a few covers, and that was put out as an album. The albums were never conceived as albums as such. They were just compilations. And now record companies were starting to give bands a little bit more leeway. They saw the need coming up. Radio was out there, FM radio stations were springing up, but they were not finding advertisers, so they had a lot of time to. They were not playing advertisements,
Right.
so they had to play longer songs. So Page saw all that going on, and he said, "That's exactly the sort of market that we want to produce for." And "Whole Lotta Love" was their first hit from the opening cut of Led Zeppelin 2, and they just produced the hell out of it.
Yeah.
They had,
Yeah.
they had all sorts of recording sessions, starting in London, at the Olympic Studios with the engineer George, and I can only guess how the last name is pronounced. Kiantz, George Kiantz, the Atlantic Studios engineer. Atlantic Studios had two studios, one smaller studio with a 16-track, 20-track recording studio, and that was supposed to be for the rock groups, but Jimmy Page took them into the bigger one that was for the symphonies that were made for movie scores and stuff like that.
Right.
Because he wanted to be able to set it up so that the mic coverage of the drums, of Bonham's drums, would get that right. He said, if we get that, everything else is just a matter of dubbing it in correctly. Of course, he had this riff, which is one of the most celebrated riffs in rock music. The riff for "Whole Lotta Love."
Mm-hmm.
He came up with it on a houseboat, the summer of '68, and he played it for the band. And he said, this is a quote from Page, "We felt the riff was addictive, like a forbidden thing." And Jimmy Page understands a little bit about addiction, so if he says that was, if he knows what he's talking about. So anyway, they had the riff, they had the drums, they had a very extensive setup with a boom mic 8 feet above the drum set, side mics. They built a platform for the drums to be on. It was an incredible production. And then they took these tapes with them, the entire tapes, on their second US tour, from city to city, doing overdubs in Los Angeles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That was all done. When the tour was over, they went to New York, and they worked with the mixer Eddie Kramer.
Yes. Quite famous guy.
And that's where some of the magic happens. We have this famous story about the echo, the pre-echo on Page's vocals.
It's vocals.
And they put some reverb on that, but they put some reverb on that to make it look as if that was intentional. It was just a bleed over from another tape that they could not get out of the recording.
Well, and that's part of the genius too, right?
Right, yeah. So they left it in, put some reverb on it, and it all sounded very intentional and it sounded really cool. So they had that going. Page was doing some funky stuff with his guitar. He had a Les Paul standard guitar, Sunburst 1958, that he bought from Joe Walsh in San Francisco while they were on tour. And he said, to get my guitar to sound surreal, I detuned it, whatever the heck that means, and pulled on the strings for a far out effect. All right, so the standard has this total versatility, allowing me to get a blistering high pitch. So he was playing around with the guitar. He was playing around with the theremin, a little instrument that you play by.
Yeah, it's got these
your hands in
these sound waves, and you adjust it.
Yes.
Oftentimes in like science fiction movies and things like that. And
Right,
Elvis
so
did
there's that.
Vibrations most famously, yeah.
And they were playing with throwing the sound and the guitars from one side to the other. This was all on an 8-track. That's all they had to work with.
Right.
They were getting everything out of it that they could. So it's become one of their anthems, one of their all-time favorite songs. Of course, it was not. Oh, by the way, Led Zeppelin was the first group, March 29th, 1975, to have 6 albums on the Billboard chart at once. When Physical Graffiti came out,
Right.
it kind of opened a nostalgia thing. So there's Physical Graffiti, and at the same time, Led Zeppelin 2, Led Zeppelin 3, Led Zeppelin 4, and Houses of the Holy. They're all in the charts at the same time. So that's also pretty incredible.
Well, they were, as you suggested, a band that always emphasized the album. They saw the album as sort of the calling card. They certainly weren't a singles band. But curiously, they find themselves on the singles chart in 1970, as you also have stated. They wouldn't go down this route again. But you just have this very peculiar event in 1970 where you have, for example, you have the Supremes, and then you have, Led Zeppelin. That you have on the charts in this time such a wide array of talent. I mean, talent is.
Oh, it's very, very eclectic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Atlanta released 2 singles of Whole Lotta Love. One of them was the studio version.
Yeah.
And then they wanted to have something for the AM radio stations as well. And arguably, this is what got them on the charts and gave them their first hit. Page hated it, of course. The studio version was 5 minutes, 33 seconds long, and the AM version was 3 minutes, 12. They cut out the middle part, this kind of free, funky, psychedelic thing that was going on. And Jimmy Page said he heard it once and never listened to it again. But again, arguably, this kind of put them on the map.
Oh, absolutely. I think it did. Yeah. It is, like you say, it's one of their signature songs. And I guess for American audiences, this would have been the first thing, most likely the first thing that they ever would have heard from Led Zeppelin, but wouldn't be the last things, because the 70s really are, that's Zeppelin's decade. I mean, I think you can argue that they become the template, for better or worse, for rock bands from that point on. And kind of the mythology that surrounds Led Zeppelin is, it's complicated.
Legendary debauchery, trashing hotel rooms, the whole 9 yards, everything that you associate with rock groups from that time. They were in the midst of it. Stories that we can't even tell here.
No, that's right. Yeah, and sort of unrepentant, debauchery. But the Zeppelin story would end with the drummer's death, John Bonham, and of course then they disband following
1980.
that.
Yes.
Yeah. So they very much are encapsulated in the 70s, but it's just such a peculiar circumstance to find them in the top 10 in January 1970 is just very odd.
Look, there's a lot to unwrap here, but there is one more thing that needs to be mentioned, and that is, of course, Whole Lotta Love is, in terms of it had a fantastic riff and so on, but lyrically, it owes almost everything to Willie Dixon's "You Know Love," which was sung by Muddy Waters in 1962. Small Faces did a version of it. They never got sued. You Need Lovin', and Robert Plant essentially just takes over Steve Marriott's phrasing, if that. We'll include both videos so you can make the comparison yourself.
That
It's
is
pretty
interesting.
clear.
Yeah, it's these bands at this time, particularly British bands, were nicking riffs, lyrics from blues artists. Probably I would have to think about this for a second, but probably few British bands owed more to the American blues than did than Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin, they had a strong feeling toward the artists of the South. They looked at them as kind of heroes, and so there was this. Almost every song that they do is a kind of homage to Black performers from.
Well, and the same is true for Small Faces. I mean, Small Faces.
Oh, that's right.
Never reached the
No.
heights of fame that Led Zeppelin did, but they in the mid '60s they were very popular. Had a number of hits,
for sure.
And it was also, they understood themselves as basically all rock bands coming out of Britain in the early '60s. They all understood themselves as being blues bands. That was their roots, from the Rolling Stones.
Exactly. Apart from the Beatles, we'll set the Beatles aside for a second, but if one thing set American bands and British bands apart from this era, it was the fact that British bands saw themselves really operating in that kind of blues tradition. That they were, they saw themselves as that next generation, and American bands by and large did. In fact, Americans, I think it's safe to say, were introduced to the blues. Most Americans were introduced to blues by British groups, including Led Zeppelin, and so. We have Led Zeppelin at, it seems odd to say, Led Zeppelin at number 5 with Whole Lot of Love. At number 6, well, it doesn't get...
Leaving on a Jet Plane.
Leaving on a Jet Plane.
Leaving on a Jet Plane. Fantastic.
So this is Peter, Paul, and Mary's version.
By Peter, Paul, and Mary. This is the group that charts with it, Peter, Paul, and Mary. It's their biggest hit. Also their final hit.
Yeah.
It's their only number 1 chart success. Leaving on a Jet Plane. Of course, it was written by Henry Deutschendorf, also known as...
Well, I think that's John Denver.
That's correct. John Denver, 1966, he writes and records the song Peter, Paul, and Mary come along and make a pretty big hit out of it. United Airlines, of course, takes it as a commercial tune. Why not? It's
yeah, why not? It's sort of, yeah, it almost has a kind of, well, it's a kind of a very commercial feel to it. Maybe you have something to say about it? I'm just curious, because Peter, Paul, and Mary, when you talk about the 60s, and you talk about folk groups, you talk about protest, you talk about a sort of earnestness. I mean, Peter, Paul, and Mary are oftentimes sort of right at the top of that list. This is, as you suggest, their high water mark. Do you have why do they matter? I mean, I would submit that they have a certain significance. I mean, what do you think about Peter, Paul, and Mary?
Well, you could possibly argue that they're a crossover. They're clearly a folk group. They understand themselves as a folk group, and they never depart very far from that. But they do pick out songs that are accessible enough and listenable enough that they can get some airplay. Puff the Magic Dragon was a big one for them. If I Had a Hammer, and so on and so forth. I find most folk music to be very serious, to be
Yes,
have wonderful messages, and to be almost unlistenable because it's so serious and so
serious. Yeah, there's no sense of irony. There's no sense. Yeah, there's no
right. Yes. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. No sense of irony. But Peter, Paul, and Mary were able to get beyond that because they did have some pop sensibility.
That's the phrase.
A Blues Brothers and so on, and so they had their time, and
They had their time, yeah.
one of the few folk groups to really have that kind of success.
That's right. And so
Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, and Peter, Paul, and Mary. Can you think of any others that had that kind of success? I mean, you have Pete Seeger and so on, but
yeah, I mean, maybe the Kingston Trio, but right, but few people, few folk artists would top Peter, Paul, and Mary, and I think they always operated within that kind of folk tradition, in a sense of earnestness there. But as you suggest a second ago, this kind of pop sensibility that they knew a good song when they heard it. I think they had some sense of what would play, what people would want to listen to, and so they did have their moments on the charts, and so Leaving on a Jet Plane. And interestingly, this would be a song that would kind of help launch then John Denver's career, and John Denver will become really a huge figure in the 1970s, kind of
right, and rightly so. He's a great singer-songwriter. Loved his stuff. And although he never had a great hit with Leaving on a Jet Plane, it's on all of his compilation albums, all his greatest hits and stuff like that.
That's right.
You just can't imagine one of those without Leaving on a Jet Plane.
That's right. It was certainly an important song for him as well. And so at number 7 is Elvis Presley, and Elvis Presley with the double-sided hit "Don't Cry Daddy" and "Rubberneckin." This is Elvis in the 70s. Elvis in the 70s, who is now thoroughly ensconced in Las Vegas. He has become, I think he's on his way to becoming a kind of parody of himself. I find very little of the output in Elvis in the 1970s to be even listenable. And so this song, these two songs actually are really, there's nothing all that important about them. I would just say Don't Cry Daddy is a kind of plaintive, sentimental tale of a man who has lost his wife, and the children are saying, "Don't worry, Daddy, you can find another mommy." It's pretty awful. Later, in the 90s, Lisa Marie, Elvis's daughter, would record a version of it where she overdubs, and it's awful. Rubbernecking is a little bit more of an up-tempo tune, but it would get life breathed into it in the early 2000s when Paul Oakenfold, DJ, would create a kind of dance mix of Rubbernecking, and that was a tune worth listening to. But these two songs Rubbernecking is campy. Don't Cry Daddy is saccharine, sentimental, dreck, and it's very much, I think, the Elvis of the 70s. 1970, in the end of 1970, Elvis would make that infamous visit to the White House where he would
Richard Nixon
with Richard Nixon,
warning him about the Beatles being drug-addled.
Yes,
can't really trust people like that. Very ironic, considering that I think at that point he was already
he was
seriously addicted.
I think he's even out of his gourd in the White House if you take a look at that picture. But there's something about Elvis in the 70s that's just kind of sad. It was only a couple years removed from his comeback special in '68. That thing on NBC where he sits down with his old road warrior friends, DJ Fontana and people like that, and they kind of clown around and play some versions of songs that they used to, and it was really kind of electric. That Elvis '68 special was Elvis, and it reminded people of why Elvis was a powerful figure. But we're removed from that, and so really for the rest of the 70s until his death in 77, we just have Elvis as a kind of shell of himself. So I don't know. I have much to recommend. I don't have much to say beyond that for Don't Cry Daddy and Rubbernecking. At number 8 is Tommy Roe and Jam Up Jelly Tight.
Jam Up Jelly Tight. We have good songs to talk about this month. Waste a lot of time on this one. It's just, it is literally forgettable. I don't remember ever hearing this song.
I have to confess that I don't remember hearing this song either. And even playing it recently, it sparked no memories whatsoever. It is a thoroughly forgettable song.
Yeah, it really is the definition of mediocrity.
Yeah.
I hear these sort of songs on the radio now, and it makes me aggressive because I'm thinking, why are they playing this when they could be playing something good?
You all can listen to it on the playlist and see what you think. And it reminded me of the kind of songs that we'd be playing in the background on dramas and situation comedies from the era where it was supposed to be, oh, there's this band and they're kind of hip. There's something about it that's supposed to be kind of cool, but there's nothing cool about it. There's nothing kind of interesting. There's nothing. I mean, I guess Tommy Rowe is probably best known for a hit called Dizzy, but Jam Up Jelly Tight. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, for me, Tommy Rowe is a one-hit wonder, and it's
yeah.
And anything else, it's just don't know it, don't care to. Especially after listening to this. Just briefly, it was released November 1969 on ABC Records. The B-side was Moon Talk. That's all we need to say about this. Let's move.
Fair enough. And so at number 9 is Creedence Clearwater Revival's two-sided, double-sided hit, Down in the Corner and Unfortunate Son. CCR, led by John Fogerty, was a California band. First, it was founded by John Fogerty's brother Tom, and they knocked around a bit in the mid to late 1960s. But by the time we got to the 1960s and into the early 70s, they really caught fire. I mean, I think in many ways, CCR is an example of a band that was really built around the single. The idea is that you could listen to CCR for 3.5 minutes and come away with something that was really, really powerful. And so their singles are amongst the most, I think, power-packed of any group of this era. Down on
the definitive AM band.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Very few of their songs went much over 3 minutes. So it was that, and they were excellent at it. I mean, they were. John Fogerty just had it down. He had it all. He had the songwriting skills. He had the vocal style. Fantastic.
Yeah, he really is a master. I think Fogerty really is, I think, a master of the single. And Willie, Down in the Corner, again, sort of the Willie and the Poor Boys, this kind of persona. There's a kind of grittiness to it. There's a kind of shuffle to it. It's an interesting song. But Fortunate Son is another thing altogether. In fact, it's so interesting to think about them being on the same 45. Fortunate Son is the raw anger of a rich man's war, poor man's fight. It talks about how a person, the narrator of the song is, he's not a senator's son. He's not able to escape the realities of life. He's not able to escape the war. It ain't me. It ain't me. And it's just angry. It becomes really a kind of anthem for many, certainly for the anti-war movement, and for those who are really objecting to the draft in particular.
Oh yeah, if you're looking for a song to put on a soundtrack for the 1960s peace movement, for the Vietnam War or something like that, you're likely to go to Fortunate Son. A lot of people have.
Yeah.
It's very, very intimately associated with the Vietnam War protests.
Yeah, and so it is, and that's exactly right. It is, it's a powerful song, and again, it's one of the anthems of the generation. Just quickly, with CCR, they were notoriously dyspeptic. Lots of strife within the band. Fogerty would basically implode the band in the early 1970s. Now again, CCR has the distinction of being a group that hit number 2 many times, but never hit number 1. And so at number 9 is the double-sided hit, down on the corner in Fortunate Son. We started this with our conversation this morning, talking a little bit about the variety on the charts in January of 1970, and that you just have a wide swing of genre, just everything is on the top 10, including at number 10, Theme to Midnight Cowboy by the piano duo of Ferrante and Teicher. Ferrante and Teicher were child prodigies. They met each other at Juilliard, and they formed a friendship, and they recorded together for, really about 3 decades. And they charted a number of times. Theirs was music that fit into a kind of a light music category, a kind of soft symphony. They were, some people I think term it kind of muzak or kind of elevator music or something. But they managed to take themes from movies, The Apartment, Exodus, and again, Midnight Cowboy, and take them into the charts, even into the top 10. They sold a lot of records. What's really strange about the song, and you can listen to it in the playlist, is it's fairly light. There's an interesting kind of melody. They do some things with effects. Ferrante and Teicher oftentimes worked with what they call prepared pianos, where they would put actually materials in the strings, the spoons and stuff, to give sort of funky sounds. So there's a kind of light experimentality to it. But the song is, okay, it's fine. You're not dramatically altered by it. But it comes from a movie, Midnight Cowboy, which was the first film to receive an X rating. That it was a film that even today, decades later, is extremely dark. The grittiness of the urban landscape and the desperate nature of the characters played by John Voight and Dustin Hoffman are just, it just takes it.
I have seen it once.
It's unbelievable.
I have no need to ever watch it again. It's just depressing. It's so depressing.
Yeah, the movie itself is bleak. I mean, it's extraordinarily bleak. But that's what makes then this theme and the fact that it appears here by these guys so peculiar, because they were a fairly avuncular duo, and they toured together, recorded together again for many years. There you have it, though, at number 10, Ferrante and Teicher's theme to Midnight Cowboy. So we want to do a little cherry picking in the rest of the top 40, some of the other songs that people were listening to in mid-1970. Right. And at number 15 on the climb is a song from the singer-songwriter Neil Diamond, and it's Holly Holy.
Holly Holy. Fantastic song. Peaked at number 6 before January 1970. Eventually went platinum. Of course, Neil Diamond started off as a songwriter. It's a real building, Tin Pan Alley. But he's obviously someone who knew very early on that this was the only thing that he was meant for, to write songs, to sing songs. And he was very, very persistent and kept at it, and built on minor successes until they became bigger successes. And right now, 1970, he's in the first big wave of his success, and he's had several waves of success. He was, in 2001, he had worldwide record sales of 115 million. He's third after Elton John and Barbra Streisand as the most successful adult contemporary artist in the history of the Billboard chart. So,
yeah,
doing something right. Love this song. My daughter and I love to put this on and just sing at the top of our lungs along with it. But it was released in October 13th, 1969, followed Sweet Caroline, which charted at number 4. So it was kind of a boom, boom. And he put both of those on the album Touching You, Touching Me, which is the line from Sweet Caroline, of course. But this is the sort of thing we were talking about. Albums that are put together in order to compile successful singles.
That's exactly right. They're the showcase for the single. Yeah, yeah. They're kind of the frame around the single, or the singles in this case. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Diamond is, yeah, go ahead.
Well, what the song's about, he says, a quote from Diamond, "What I tried to do was to create a religious experience between a man and a woman as opposed to a man and a God." And we're going to look at that because when we talk about something, it's similar to things that Harrison was saying about that. But okay, that's pretty much it.
Well, okay, I would just say that if Diamond, and Diamond certainly has his critics, and if Diamond, and mostly the critics would suggest that Diamond is a humorless schmuck, and that he takes himself enormously seriously, and way, way too seriously, as you get some sense from that quote. There is this, you know, there's not much irony when it comes to Neil Diamond, but I think you're right. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. He's sold a tremendous amount of records. His songs have been recorded by a whole host of artists. And this was, I mean, really, we're talking about, you know, you're talking about waves of fame. And I think that's when waves of popularity with Diamond. And he's clearly at a crest in 1970 of another major wave of popularity and of influence. There's no question about that. And so you have Neil Diamond with Holly Holy. Now, also in the charts at this time is it's a 17. It had been at #1 for a couple of weeks in December. It is, well, it's Kiss Him Goodbye by Steam. And if that title doesn't necessarily ring a bell, you know, part of the song will. It's an indelible. It's the old earworm. It's the na na na, right?
Na 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 na. Yeah.
It, you know, and again, a kind of one-hit wonder. Steam wasn't a band. They were, you know, a set of studio musicians. They came across this song, DiCarlo, Paul Lenka, and a guy named Dale Freebauer wrote it. They hurriedly kind of put together a kind of, you know, set of guys to play it. Released on the Mercury label, and it just caught fire. The song remains alive because it's become a kind of anthem at sporting events. It's a kind of derisive cheer when you want to lay it on to your opposing team if they're way behind or something like that. And so culturally, the song has never disappeared. It's everywhere, and everybody is, you know, you just suggested a second ago, sort of knows at least part of the song. There's not really much to say about it beyond the fact that there always has been a place in American popular music for kind of clever, catchy songs. And the one-hit wonder is, you know, in a way, it's kind of the backbone of popular music, that, you know, there's a kind of rocket, you know, there's this kind of interesting song, this interesting tune that rockets to fame. And then, you know, you never hear from these people again, and Steam would be, you know, fit into that category. But Kiss Him Goodbye is at number 17. At number 18 is, well, it's a group from California, most notably 3 singers from California, Three Dog Night, and a song called Eli's Coming.
Yeah, Eli's Coming was originally written and recorded by Laura Nyro?
Nero, yeah, I think, yeah. Nero, maybe.
Let's say Laura Nyro in 1967. Laura Nyro is an interesting figure. She was
very much
a very central figure in the whole Laurel Canyon community.
So briefly, what Laurel Canyon was? What, Dave? Just briefly, just where is Laurel Canyon?
Laurel Canyon is in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and it's a section of Los Angeles where, in the 40s and 50s, big Hollywood stars would go, kind of a isolated area with a lot of woods, stuff like that. And in the 60s, rock groups and rock singers and writers found this and kind of created their own little community there.
Yes.
People like Mama Cass and Joni Mitchell, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Neil Young.
Peter Tork of the Monkees.
Peter Tork, and Jim Morrison. Love Street was about a street in that area.
The Lizard King. Yes, Jim Morrison. Yes, there you go.
So, and Laura Nyro was one of the people in that scene, but never enjoyed the kind of popularity that many of the other
That's right.
did. Although she was universally admired by them. These people collaborated with her, admired her work.
Songwriter, absolutely.
Yeah.
She was beloved.
So she wrote Eli's Coming.
Yeah.
When she wrote it, it was kind of a song about a song to herself. Eli's coming. You have to protect your heart. He's a heartbreaker.
Yeah.
And of course, is a group with 3 male singers, so it takes on a slightly different tone, a different message, which I have always interpreted as meaning Eli's coming. Girlfriend, my girlfriend. You've got to realize he's a seducer and a heartbreaker. Stay close to me. That's kind of how I always.
That no good that no good can come from interacting with Eli on any level. So, a malevolent figure. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Very
This
different.
peak, recorded in 1969 by Three Dog Night. B-side "Circle for a Landing." They recorded it for the Dunhill record label, and it peaked at number 10. Previous to.
One of many hits from Three Dog Night. And so we have Eli's Coming, which is, again, most notable in many ways for who wrote it. And again, this is what Three Dog Night did over and over again. They recorded songs from up-and-coming songwriters, and so at 18. Now, you mentioned, we started this conversation, you talked a little bit about what was happening with the Fab Four in England. It was really the end. But at number 20, you have really this double-sided hit that's fascinating. The Come Together and Something. Two very different.
It really is fascinating. There's a lot to unwrap there because, for one thing, it was a double A side single. Yeah. And Billboard Hot 100 actually changed the rules, changed the way that they handled the ratings. Right. Because instead of just the individual songs, they rated the entire single. So they listed as "Come Together Something." It's often listed the other way around, "Something Come Together."
Right.
But, both fantastic songs, both Beatles classics. The single peaked at number 1. Again, earlier than this, and it's the opening cut of Abbey Road, or rather, "Come Together" is the opening cut of Abbey Road, and "Something" is the second cut. So for "Come Together," Lennon wrote it. He sings the lead. He plays rhythm and guitar. He plays electric piano.
It's
and the rest of the group just does their thing. Everybody's on their own thing, and McCartney provides backing vocals, but he complains that he would have liked to have done some harmonies with
sure.
John.
Yeah.
But John was just kind of, no, this is my thing. I'll take care of it.
His thing. It's his song for sure.
Yeah. And so that's what he went with. Just quickly, Rolling Stone put "Come Together" at 202 of the 500 greatest songs of all time. Number 9 of the Beatles' 100 greatest songs. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not that enthusiastic about it, but okay.
No.
Strangely enough, Lennon was sued by Morris Levy of Big 7 Music, which owned the rights to Chuck Berry's "You Can't Catch Me."
Mm-hmm.
There are some musical similarities to the song, and
no question
from "You Can't Catch Me."
Yeah.
Here on a flat top, he was moving up with me.
It's pretty close, isn't it?
Pretty damn close.
Pretty damn close.
They settled out of court. It was a very strange arrangement. Lennon was to record some things from Big Seven. Anyway, so that went on. One of the many times that people got sued because they borrowed too much from someone else.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, something. A lot of people think it's about Harrison's wife, Patty Boyd. She thinks it's about her. He told her it was her. And in the early stages, this is something he said. But as time went on, he moved further and further away from that. And in the end, he was saying it was a song about Krishna. It's this quote,
Okay.
when you love a woman, it's the God in her that you see. So I think he and Neil Diamond should get together and have some discussions about writing about God and women and divinity as a female principle. Anyway, something was universally loved. Harrison had a hard time placing it. He started writing it in September of '68, working on the White Album. McCartney and Lennon weren't at all interested in including it in the White Album. So he thought about giving it to Joe Cocker.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe Cocker did end up covering it as well.
Yeah.
But not first. He was going to give it to Jackie Lomax, who he was producing an album for her
Mm-hmm.
debut. All because everybody in the group and Martin included were saying, no, it's not really right for us. Well, clearly at some point they changed their mind. Martin even said it's derivative and saccharine early on.
Yeah.
Later he changed his tune and said something, and Here Comes the Sun, Harrison's other big contribution to are fantastic songs. It doesn't get better than that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Lennon said something is the best song on Abbey Road.
I think it is. Yeah.
Most covered Beatles song after Yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
150 people had covered something by the end of the 70s.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's got a version.
First time I ever heard it was on my dad's Frank Sinatra album.
Sinatra loved the song, right?
He loved it. He played it all the time. He often introduced it in concert as being a Lennon and McCartney song. One understands where he got that idea. It's the Beatles song.
For sure.
Very, very few Beatles hits had ever been written by Harrison. But he did actually correct that toward the end.
Yeah.
Rolling Stones puts it at 278 of their all-time 500 greatest hits. Mojo, #7 best Beatles song. So people loved it. Obviously, it was very, very well received. And with Abbey Road, Harrison really came into his own as a songwriter toward the end of the Beatles career, unfortunately.
Without question. And obviously then Harrison would then go on then to take so much of this pent up energy and so many of these songs that had not been recorded, and then in later this year, released later this year, then would be All Things Must Pass, his
triple LP,
triple LP, which is just
all the things that the Beatles would not put on.
Wouldn't touch. Yeah, it's Harrison's situation within the Beatles was a confusing one, and even without the discord between Lennon and McCartney and all of that, I think Harrison would have walked. Right? That would be an untenable situation for someone with that much talent.
I think what Lennon and Harrison were both looking at toward the end was to pursue solo projects next to
Yeah, next to
what's going on in the Beatles. I think both of them saw the potential to do some solo work in addition to being in the Beatles. But of course, that's not what happened. Just a couple more things. Ivor, the song received the Ivor Novella Award for the best song and lyrically of 1969. And the Broadcast Music Incorporation said it was the 17th most performed song of the 20th century, with over 5 million performances. 5 million.
I think it's a staggering it's a staggering achievement. If Harrison had done nothing else, having written something would be, you know, would put him on a certain kind of pedestal. I mean, it's a remarkable song.
Oh, just one thing, a trivia question for you. Something in the way she moves, the first line of the song. Where did you get that from?
James Taylor.
Wow, excellent. Wow.
James Taylor had just been signed to Apple, and struggling to come up with the Taylor song that he nicked it from.
Something in the way she moves.
That's it. That is it. That is it.
That's the title. Yeah.
Yeah, they spent a fair amount of time together in those early Apple years. In fact, you know, if you think about Apple in the late '60s, the Apple building, that must have been quite a vibe. Because I guess Harrison was in there a lot.
There were all sorts of people there. Harry Nilsson, James Taylor. You had the we're going.
Oh, you have well, you had Badfinger. You have
Badfinger.
There's the female folk artist whose name escapes me at the moment. Those Were the Days, my friend, was her song. But yeah, there's just a slew of people in and out.
Yeah, they really did support and bring out a number of impressive.
They really did, and they were obviously, you know, going in a lot of different directions. But had they been able to somehow, or someone within the group, been able to focus on Apple and Apple core, and just that kind of whole talent identification process, that could have been really interesting as well, because they had more hits than misses in the confined time that Apple existed as a label that was, you know, introducing other artists. They knew what the hell they were doing. It was really interesting.
Yeah.
The
they were producing these people and things like that. So yeah, it could have been very interesting.
Could have been. I guess that's sort of the story of the Beatles, is what could have been. I mean, they did so much, but yet there seemed like so much potential if you think about it. The last thing we wanted to talk about today was the one more song that was number 29. Song that actually had peaked at number 2, but it's R.B. Greaves' number, Take a Letter, Maria. Take a Letter, Maria is the song of a kind of dictation. Someone is taking dictation for this guy, for the narrator, and he's ready to start anew. He's ready to get, and it's a little bit vague in terms of all that, but there's clear that there's a break coming. It's a kind of upbeat number, Latin flavor, almost kind of a mariachi band in the background. Curiously, again, this was written and recorded by Greaves. The work happened in Alabama at a place called Muscle Shoals Studio, as the Muscle Shoals sound. The studio musicians there they had their own kind of little empire down there. It's super interesting. The Muscle Shoals recording studio, very, very tiny place in southern Alabama. The studio itself was incredibly tiny and decrepit, but magical things happened there. And so it drew artists from all over the world, not just the South, but all over the world. They wanted to record in Alabama. The Greaves song appeared on the Atlantic label, which again, in this era, Atlantic means soul. And so if it's on the Atlantic label, it means that somebody really believes in the song. And so, yeah, R.B. Greaves, Take a Letter, Maria. Maybe you have a thought about this song. I know it's
it's so strange. It's almost a throwback to a period 10, 15 years earlier, where it's a trope about becoming attracted to their secretaries and leaving their wives.
Yeah, something like, yeah.
Yeah, Andy Williams sings about it's kind of creepy, but
Oh, it is kind of creepy. Oh, it is. It's just so upbeat.
What's particularly creepy about it is that the Maria who's taking the letter is presumably the woman that he's leaving his wife for.
Presumably, there's right. There's a little doubt there, but it's clear that this guy is ready to move on. And so,
Take a letter, Maria, address it to my wife.
It's.
I'm not coming home, something like that. It's strange.
It's actually quite cold-blooded, in a way, but it's such a kind of peppy little, and you can all listen.
Oh, it's a lot of fun to listen to. Yeah, it's
like it's like this. It's bad news. It's dark. So those are the songs that caught our attention from January 1970. It's a transition point in American life. And the 1970s are, it had its own kind of tumult, and so we'll talk more about the 70s as we move along with this series. So thank you for watching us today, Dave. You've got a couple words here about those who want to subscribe and so on.
Right. Well, because we've taken a lot of stuff from the end of the 60s into this. This is, I'm thinking, presumably going to be our longest video of the sort. But please subscribe here or here. It's somewhere along here. Anyway, you'll have a chance to subscribe. There's also a playlist.
Right.
I would recommend having the playlist in another window, and you can just listen to the songs that we're talking about as we talk about them before going on.
Absolutely.
Ideal thing. But we'll see you next time for February 1970. Looking forward to seeing you. Put any comments you have down below. We look forward to reading and to hearing from you.
Absolutely. We'll see you all next time. Bye-bye now.